Okay, I'm sure most of you have seen my vintage electronics videos, but tonight I'm going to rant and ramble and reflect and just run my mouth for a few minutes. Got my first tube radio in '89, a wooden case Sears Silvertone from '36. I was 12 years old, and I haven't come up for air since. And in 1990, someone gave me my first broken TV. It was a 19-inch RCA black and white from the early 60s with no UHF tuner. I watched that set for about a year. It was a nice upgrade from the 9-inch black and white GE that my parents had let me use. And then I found a 19-inch black and white with UHF, so I sold the old RCA for $25 to a young newlywed couple that really didn't have a whole lot, but they were thrilled to get that black and white TV. And I heard a year later that they were still watching it, so obviously it was a good television. Well, it wasn't long that I started picking up little 9-inch and 12-inch and 19-inch black and white sets at yard sales, and back then I could pick them up for $1 or $2, spend a few dollars in parts, and sell them for $20 to $30. The 19-inch sets would bring as much as $50. And then I started getting a few color TVs like what you see standing up on edge there, and this was an easy $75 in the early to mid 90s, no problem. And it didn't take 6 months to get rid of it either. Well, fast forward to the 21st century, and people have gotten a lot snobbier about what they'll own. Something like this I couldn't give away. Same goes for this set. In fact, it's getting hard to sell any kind of CRT television for any kind of decent money. Seems like if it's not flat screen, they don't want it. Now take this little Magnavox record player. You've seen it before. It's the one that I restored. Made a couple of videos of it. I really like it, but since I'm running out of room, I decided to put it up for sale. Well, I've advertised it on several local classified venues for $150, which may seem high, but when you think about it, it's really not. When you think about that it's been restored, well, I've gotten absolutely 0 phone calls on it. But yet these same morons around here will go out and spend $100, $200, $300 or more on one of these crappy Crosley knockoff plastic Chinese reproductions that won't last 2 years, and this thing's 1,000 times better, but try to convince any of these morons of that. They think it's old and obsolete and junk, so they won't buy it, but that's fine. If nobody buys it, I'll just stash it in the building and with all the other stuff. And a couple of things that's changed over the past 20 years is, well, nowadays it seems like technology, if you want to call it that, is changing so rapidly, and everybody thinks they have to keep up with the Joneses. They think the amount of high-tech gadgets they own is what makes them who they are instead of their character. So, you know, that's why they think they've all got to have the latest and greatest of everything. That wasn't so much the case 20 years ago. And another thing is the entitlement mentality that so many people have today. I know a few years ago I was going to a rather large church in town that I'm no longer associated with, but there were young people there that thought they deserved the best and highest end of everything right off the bat, stuff that it took their parents 20 years to get, but they thought they were owed it right out of the box. I remember one kid saying that was just fixing to get married, "Oh, we looked at the $90,000 and $100,000 houses, and those just weren't going to cut it." And I'm thinking to myself, if I needed a house, and I think I could find one for $100,000 to live in, but you know, most kids today, they're not like that. Or I'm saying most kids, I'll just say most younger adults today are not like that. You know, they think they ought to have it all, and they want it all right now. And I think what caused that is the way they were raised. Most of their parents gave them everything they wanted on a silver platter. They didn't have to want for nothing. They didn't know what it was to earn anything. And most parents have the mentality that I don't want my kids growing up the way I grew up. Well, you know, it might have done their kids some good to grow up the way they grew up. Instead of, I know my parents didn't give me everything on a silver platter. They provided my basic needs, but there wasn't no such thing as me going to them, Daddy, I want a big screen color TV. Daddy, I want this. Daddy, I want that. No, that wouldn't have worked. And while we're on the subject of kids and parents, let's talk about discipline for a minute. I was raised by older people, my grandparents actually, and they were old school, and they taught me right from wrong, and I knew what to expect when I got out of line. Punishment could range from a serious talking to a serious butt beating, depending on what I did, but, you know, I knew my parents meant business, and I always strived to behave. And my parents told my teachers at school, if he gets out of line, you tear his butt up, and he'll get it again when he gets home. Guess what? I never got out of line at school. Well, nowadays, you can't even punish the kids in school anymore for fear of some parent coming up there, or parent, yeah, whatever. I don't call them parents, but at any rate, they can't discipline the kids anymore for fear of someone's parent coming up there and threatening to sue the school district or whatever. I know my mother got into a fight with one of the neighborhood mothers over something her kid did, and she's like, no, my kid don't do stuff like that. Had that been my parents, I'd have got my butt tore up on the spot. I know the house next door to me has been vacant for 4 or 5 years, and it was recently sprayed with graffiti, and we think we know who did it, but we can't prove it. And who we think did it has the type of parents that I was describing that don't do anything to control their kids. I can promise you, had I done something like that, I would have been over there cleaning it up after my daddy got through tearing my behind up. And that's just the way it was, and that's the way it needs to be now. You know, parents need to start being parents and quit taking up for their darling little angels and acting like they can't do no wrong. I know if I ever have kids, they're going to be raised the same way I was raised, and they're not going to get everything under the sun they want. If they want it, when they get older, they can work for it. They might very well get this television stuck in their bedroom, and if they don't like it, too bad. And here's another thing we didn't have 20 years ago, these cell phones. And by the way, this was the cheapest one they had when I bought this one, and the only reason I got it was for emergencies. Only a handful of people have the number, and they know not to give it out to anybody. However, most people today are not that way. Most people are so attached to their mobile device that they don't even know what's going on around them. And personally, I think it ought to be against the law to text and talk while driving. Nothing's that important that you can't wait till you get home or in a stationary position to take care of your business. And another thing I don't get are these people that go out and spend hundreds of dollars for a so-called smartphone, and then in 6 months, when one comes along that's supposedly a little bit better, they toss the original one out and go buy a new one. Well, I'm not going to spend that much money on a phone, I can tell you right now. All I need is something to make calls on, and this one will do just fine. Okay, we're about out of time here, and I think I've ranted enough for one day, but you kind of get the idea about how I feel about certain subjects. But I promise we'll get back to the normal electronic restorations pretty soon. Okay, thanks for watching, and more to come later. And you can read my description for more in-depth ranting. Okay, on second thought, I thought of a few more things I'd like to talk about, so bear with me. Just thinking about the neighborhood that I live in. I grew up in this neighborhood, and in the 80s and 90s, most of the residents were the original homeowners that had been here from the 50s through the 70s, and You know, everybody was friendly to one another, and in fact, most of us even had keys to all the other houses in case one of us locked ourselves out. You know, we had a way to get back in. You know, nobody got too heavily into anybody else's business, but we could all be friendly to one another, and everybody was willing to help when needed. Well, all the old folks have died off or since moved on, and now pretty much the neighborhood consists of people that if you speak to them, they act like they want to cut your throat. In fact, a lot of them I don't even trust anymore. That could explain why we have a security system and iron gates around the house to keep people from messing with it. And another thing is all the divorces that take place today that used to not happen. I remember when people, my parents, they were married almost 50 years. And I knew an older couple that they were married about 74, 75 years. They married during the Depression, and she's told me stories about how hard life was, but she said we had genuine love for one another, and we made it through it. Well, in today's world, I think love is lacking in a lot of marriages. I think the only reason a lot of people get married is for appearance sake or for what they can get out of the other one, and when somebody comes along that's more beneficial, as they say, when the grass is greener on the other side, then they want to get a divorce and move on to something else. And that's wrong in my opinion. In fact, there are people my age that are on their second and third marriage right now, and I have no desire to live that way. You know, if I ever get married, I want it to be for the right reasons, and I want it to be long-lasting. But of course, given how most members of the opposite sex in my age group act today, I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. And to be honest with you, the older I get, the more set in my ways I become, and I'm just perfectly happy with the way things are. It also seems like in today's world, people are not as eager to help others as they used to be. I know I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. He's in his 70s, and he has to pay his own grandson $50 to cut his grass, which in my opinion is a hell of a note, excuse my language, but you know, you shouldn't have to pay your own grandson to come cut your yard. He ought to be willing to do that to help his granddaddy out. But so many kids are raised with the me, me, me mentality, and it's all about me, 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 that, you know, that they just can't fathom actually helping someone without expecting anything in return. Okay, we really are just about out of time now, so I guess I'll quit ranting for tonight, and more vintage electronics videos to come. Okay, thanks for watching, and more to come later.